My name is Hannah Mitchell. I grew up in a small house on a quiet street in Ohio, the kind of street where you know the names of everyone's dogs. When I was just 14 years old, my mom and my brother, Michael, decided I wasn't important enough to keep in their lives. They simply walked away, like I was a piece of furniture they didn't want to move, an old photograph they were tired of looking at. They left me behind with my dad. For 18 years, the silence from them was deafening. No calls, no letters, no signs that they even remembered I existed. Then, the news came that Dad had passed away, and suddenly the ghosts of my past were standing on my doorstep. Dressed in black, acting all somber, but their eyes were hungry. They kept flicking around the room, taking inventory, looking for what he had left behind. They weren't there for him. They were there for the money. But they didn't understand the man they had abandoned. They didn't need a lawyer to tell them they had no claim. They didn't need to see any papers. My words alone were enough to stop them cold. I remember the day they left like a scar that never fades. I can still feel the warmth of the sun on my face and the hard, splintery wood of the porch railing under my hands. I was 14. It was a Tuesday. Mom and Michael were loading boxes into a car I'd never seen before, a shiny, dark sedan that looked completely out of place parked on our cracked driveway. I stood there, frozen in my own doorway, a silent observer of my life being dismantled. I didn't understand. The boxes weren't filled with random clutter. They were filled with the heart of our home. Mom's favorite books, Michael's video game consoles, the framed photo of the two of them at the beach that used to sit on the mantelpiece. They weren't just packing things. They were selectively erasing their life with us. With me. Mom paused, wiping a bead of sweat from her brow. She walked over to Michael and kissed him on his forehead, a long, tender kiss full of promises I couldn't hear. She whispered something to him and he nodded, a serious look on his 16-year-old face. He glanced at me for a split second, his eyes holding a mixture of pity and indifference, before he turned away and climbed into the passenger seat. He didn't say goodbye. He didn't say anything. Mom walked past me, her perfume a familiar scent that suddenly felt foreign and suffocating. I waited for her to stop, to turn, to give me an explanation. I waited for her to say, "Goodbye, honey," or "I'll call you tonight," or even just, "I'm sorry." But there was nothing. Her face was a mask of grim determination. She got behind the wheel, put the key in the ignition, and the engine purred to life. The sound was a final, terrible punctuation mark on my childhood. They just drove away. Down our street, around the corner where the big oak tree stood, and out of my life forever. I stood on that porch until the sound of their car had completely faded, until the dust had settled back onto the road. Tears streamed down my face, hot and silent, my heart a heavy, cold stone in my chest. That's when Dad came out. He didn't say anything either, not at first. He just wrapped his big, strong arm around my shoulders and held me tight. That's all I had left. Him. His silent, steadfast presence against the roaring emptiness they had left behind. The years that followed were defined by that silence. It was a living, breathing thing in our small house. No birthday cards ever arrived in the mail with Mom's familiar handwriting. The phone never rang on Christmas morning with their voices on the other end. My 16th birthday came and went. I remember staring at the phone on the kitchen wall, willing it to ring, just once. It didn't. I graduated from high school, top of my class. I stood on the stage, giving my speech, my eyes scanning the crowd, searching for two faces I knew I wouldn't find. I saw my friends with their complete families, mothers beaming, brothers cheering. My dad was there, of course, his proud smile big enough for 4 people, but the empty seats beside him felt like canyons. It was as if they had moved to another planet, a place where I was just a forgotten memory. Dad tried his best to fill the void. He learned to bake a lopsided birthday cake. He took me to father-daughter dances where we both felt awkward but loved. He tried to have conversations about boys and friendships that he didn't quite understand. He worked double shifts at the factory to make sure I had everything I needed. But there was always an empty chair at the dinner table, a silence where their laughter used to be. The betrayal carved scars so deep I thought they would never fade. It wasn't just that they were gone. It was the chilling realization that I hadn't been worth staying for. I hadn't mattered enough. My own mother and my only brother had looked at me and decided I was disposable. I could have crumbled. I could have let that sadness and anger swallow me whole, turning me bitter and broken. For a while, I think I came close. But one day, watching my dad come home from a 16-hour shift, his face gray with exhaustion, but his eyes still lighting up when he saw me, something inside me shifted. I wouldn't let them win. I wouldn't let their leaving be the end of my story. I poured every ounce of my hurt and confusion into something productive. Books became my refuge. I spent my weekends in the town library, losing myself in other worlds, my schoolwork becoming a mission. I got a part-time job at the local diner, the clatter of plates and the endless cups of coffee a welcome distraction. I saved every dollar, putting it away for college, for a future that I would build myself. Dad and I became a team. We tackled the old house, fixing the things that were broken, a quiet metaphor for what we were doing for each other. We spent a whole summer painting the kitchen a bright, cheerful yellow. We learned how to fix the leaky faucet under the sink, laughing as we got soaked. We planted a garden in the backyard, coaxing tomatoes and cucumbers from the stubborn Ohio soil. These small acts of rebuilding our home were acts of rebuilding our lives, filling the empty spaces with our own hard work and shared love. Slowly, I started to build a life for myself, a quiet, steady life. Dad's love was my anchor, the one constant in a world that had proven to be terrifyingly unreliable. He never missed a school play, never failed to ask about my day, never made me feel like anything less than the center of his universe. He showed me what true family was. It wasn't about blood, it was about showing up. Time moved on, as it always does, indifferent to our pain. Years blurred into a decade, then almost two. I finished college, got a good job as a teacher in our local elementary school, and moved into a small apartment of my own, just a few blocks from Dad. He started to get sick. It began subtly, a persistent cough he dismissed as a cold, a weariness that settled deep in his bones. But the cough didn't go away, and the weariness grew. Doctors' visits became a regular part of our routine. The diagnoses went from bad to worse. I was there for every appointment, holding his hand as we listened to the sterile, detached words of the doctors. I sat by his hospital bed during the long, sleepless nights, listening to the beep of the machines and the sound of his labored breathing. I learned how to manage his medications, how to help him when he was too weak to stand. In all that time, through all those months of fear and decline, the phone never rang. Not a single call from Mom or Michael. Our family friends had told them how sick he was, but they remained ghosts. It was just me, taking care of the man who had always taken care of me, my heart aching with a fierce, protective love and a cold, simmering rage at the two people who should have been there with us. In his last days, he was peaceful. We didn't talk about them. We didn't need to. We talked about old memories, about the time we went fishing and I fell in the lake, about the yellow kitchen we painted together. I held his hand, its skin thin and papery, and told him how much I loved him, how much I thanked him for staying. And then he was gone. The day of the funeral was gray and cold, a fitting backdrop for the hollowness I felt inside. The church was filled with people who had loved my dad, their faces etched with genuine grief. And then, through the crowd, I saw them. They were standing near the back, looking like strangers playing a part. Mom. Her hair was perfectly styled, her makeup flawless. She looked elegant and sorrowful, a performance for the crowd. And Michael. He wore an expensive suit, a gold watch gleaming on his wrist. They looked well-fed, prosperous, and completely untouched by the life and death we had just endured. They walked with an air of practiced solemnity, but their eyes gave them away. They kept darting around the room, scanning faces, not for comfort, but for someone of importance. I knew who they were looking for. The lawyer, the one who held the will. The shock of seeing them was like a physical blow, knocking the air from my lungs. But it was quickly replaced by a cold, hard clarity. After the service, everyone came back to our house. The house Mom had walked out of 18 years ago without a backward glance. It was surreal watching her move through the rooms, touching objects as if she still had a right to them. The atmosphere was heavy, thick with the smell of coffee and sympathy casseroles. But beneath the grief, a new tension began to coil. My brother, Michael, his voice a little too loud, a little too casual, cornered one of Dad's old friends. "So," he said, "Dad was always a smart guy with his money. I assume he had all the estate papers in order." A few minutes later, Mom was talking to my aunt, her voice a sugary whisper. "As his wife," she said, though they had been separated for nearly 2 decades. "I do have certain rights, you know. I just want to make sure everything is handled properly." They moved through the crowd, shaking hands and offering fake condolences, but their mission was clear. They kept trying to corner me, to get me alone. "So, Hannah," Michael said, his arm draped casually over a chair, "when do you think the lawyer will want to meet? We should probably get things sorted out sooner rather than later." Mom would pat my arm, her touch feeling like ice. "Your father would have wanted everything to be divided fairly, dear." Their greed was a tangible thing, a thick, suffocating cloud that polluted the memory of my father in his own home. They expected me to break, to scream, to cry, to make a scene. But I didn't. I just watched them. I stayed calm, my face a steady, unreadable mask. I listened to their questions, their entitled demands, their complete lack of shame. My heart was pounding against my ribs, a furious drumbeat of 18 years of pain and abandonment, but on the outside I was still. And in that stillness a powerful realization washed over me. They thought this was about the house, the savings account, the old truck in the garage. They were so small, they couldn't see it. I didn't need a single dollar to prove who had truly mattered to my father. My inheritance wasn't something that could be written on a piece of paper. It was the 18 years of memories. It was every school play he attended, every dinner he cooked, every time he held me when I cried. It was his unwavering love and his quiet strength. That was my inheritance, and it was something they could never, ever touch. My silence wasn't weakness. It was a gathering storm. It was me, finally realizing that I held all the power. The room was full of relatives and neighbors, their conversations hushed, their eyes occasionally drifting towards the unfolding drama between Mom, Michael, and me. I saw Michael whisper something to Mom, and they both looked at me with impatient, calculating expressions. That was it. That was the final push I needed. I took a slow, deep breath and stood up. The scraping of my wooden chair against the floor seemed to echo in the sudden silence that fell over the room. Every eye turned to me. I walked to the center of the living room, planting my feet on the worn rug where Dad and I had watched countless movies together. I looked at them, my mother and my brother, and I saw them not as family, but as the strangers they were. "You walked out on us," I said. My voice was quiet, but it carried to every corner of the room. It was clear and steady, laced with an edge of steel I didn't know I possessed. I looked directly at my mother. "You left him when he was a good man who loved you. You left me when I was just a child who needed her mother." My gaze shifted to Michael. "You left your father and your sister without a single word. Not for one birthday, not for one Christmas, not once in 18 years. I let the weight of those words settle in the silent room. "You weren't here," I continued, my voice growing stronger with every truth I spoke. "You weren't here for the 18 birthdays he celebrated without his son. You weren't here when the roof leaked and we spent a weekend fixing it ourselves, our hands raw and sore. You weren't here for the lonely holidays or the parent-teacher conferences. You weren't here when he got sick. You weren't here for a single doctor's appointment, for a single night spent in the hospital. You weren't here to hold his hand when he was scared. You don't get to stand in his house now and ask for his things." I took a step closer, my eyes locking onto theirs. "You don't get to walk back in here now. Not for his money, and not for me." Or Michael's face, so smug just moments before, turned a sickly shade of pale. He opened his mouth, but no words came out. He looked around the room, searching for an ally, but found only condemnation in the eyes of our family. Mom began to stammer, her well-rehearsed victimhood finally failing her. "Hannah, you don't understand. It was complicated," she began, her voice weak and pathetic. She tried to muster tears, but her eyes remained dry. The room was utterly silent, the air thick with unspoken judgment. I saw my uncle, Dad's brother, shake his head slowly in disgust. My aunt, who had brought over a lasagna, walked over and put a comforting hand on my shoulder. I didn't need a will. I didn't need a lawyer. The simple, unvarnished truth was my weapon, and it had struck its target perfectly. Their greedy, pathetic plan crumbled right there in front of everyone. They looked defeated, exposed, and utterly ashamed. They left soon after, mumbling flimsy excuses. They didn't walk out this time. They scurried, avoiding eye contact, the front door closing behind them with a quiet, definitive click. After they were gone, it was like a storm had passed. The air in the house felt lighter, cleaner. The hushed conversation started again, but their tone had changed. It was softer, more supportive. My aunt squeezed my shoulder before letting go. My uncle came over and gave me a hug. "You did good, kid," he whispered. "Your dad would be so proud." Later that evening, when everyone had gone and the house was quiet again, I walked over to the fireplace. I picked up his favorite photograph, the one of him on a fishing trip, holding up a small bass with a huge, proud grin, his eyes crinkled at the corners with pure joy. I gently wiped the glass and placed it in the center of the mantel. That was his legacy. Not a bank account, but a life filled with love, resilience, and quiet dignity. In that moment, I finally forgave myself for all those years of feeling unwanted, of believing that their leaving was somehow my fault. It was never about me. It was about them and their own brokenness. And in the end, my voice, the voice they had silenced for 18 years, had been enough. It had been more than enough. It had been everything.